Hi, and welcome to another episode of Everything Digital Health. I'm Marcus Bohr. I'm a GP and clinical informatician, software developer. And today we have got a very special guest, Rob Dyke, somebody who I used to spend a lot of time hacking with things. And we're going to talk about NHSbuntu, which is a project we did because no one asked us to do it. I'm going to hand over to Rob just to do a little intro.
Yeah, thanks, Marcus. It's great to be with you again, right? We've hacked so many things. We've spoken about this for so many times, and I'm really glad that we're getting to do this recording today. My name is Rob Dyke. I'm currently Director of Platform Engineering for a SaaS company. For most of the 2010s, I was Director at Neova Health, a company that made open source nursing observation software for acute and general hospitals. So Marcus and I met through things like NHS Hack Day, and we had a real shared passion, didn't we, Marcus, for just trying to do things better, do things differently. Mainly differently in order to get things better. I think we both subscribe to the doing the same thing again is just going to get us the same nonsense that we had already. So we got involved in a few quite exciting projects. I remember very fondly working on the OpenGP SOC.
That's something that needs its own episode, I reckon.
Okay.
So OpenGP SOC.
Part 2 can come. In 2017, we were hanging out just after Christmas, just after the New Year, actually. And you asked me, how hard could it be to make a desktop operating system for the NHS? And I think I said something along the lines of, yeah, it sounds hard. Like it's a 2 bottle of wine problem.
That's exactly what you said, yeah.
A 2 bottle of wine problem to solve this. So let's get started. And I think we got started that very evening. We were at my place in London. We had a bottle of wine and we started making things. You did some graphics and came up with a cool logo for us and a name. We'll come on to the name in a minute, I think, in more detail. And I got started reading the internet to find out how to make your own Linux distribution. We used Linux because it's open source, because it's what we knew and it's what we spent time with. And we knew that we could make our own distribution because there's loads of distributions of Linux.
We should probably digress for the people who are not like major Linux geeks like us. So Linux is a free operating system, which is based on the Unix kind of standard. But importantly, it's not Unix. It's its own separate free thing. And it was invented or essentially popularized by Linus Torvalds, hence the name Linux. But underneath it also uses a lot of the GNU project, which is another open source project. But the key thing is it's an operating system, a bit like Windows or Mac OS. So it's point and click, Windows and drag and drop kind of thing. That's how most people experience Linux anyway. Crucially, what's different to, say, Windows is that there are loads and loads of different versions of different types of Linux. So even within Ubuntu, which is just one kind of branch of the family tree of the desktop Linuxes, there's standard Ubuntu. There's Ubuntu with a different desktop environment, like Kubuntu, which uses KDE, or Lubuntu, which uses LXDE. So what I'm trying to get across here is that Linux is not just one thing. You have a desktop environment, but then you can have Linuxes that look radically different from each other. But essentially, under the hood, they're all doing the same thing. And we started to think, hey, what the problem is with the NHS is that it's addicted to Microsoft, and that's costing it, it's we calculated it as being £450 million each time they refreshed the kind of contractual negotiations, which was happening every kind of 3 or 4 or 5 years. Wouldn't it be great if there was an alternative where they didn't have to use Windows for everything? And that's where we started from. It's like, let's make NHSbuntu, you know, an Ubuntu flavor that's for the NHS. So that's
Ubuntu flavor for the NHS. Exactly that. An Ubuntu flavor for the NHS. As you said, there's different themes of Ubuntu, but there's different purposes of it. There's definitely Ubuntu's for sound and audio engineering, Ubuntu's for scientific purposes, and we wanted to do one that was for the NHS. Now when we were thinking about the sorts of things that the NHS land and people who work in the NHS do on their computers, we worked out that probably like 80% of the desktops in the NHS are really for trying to do administrative stuff. Yeah, so they're writing documents, doing spreadsheets, emails, they're using collaboration tools, but on the whole, these are browser stuff or their document stuff. This is not anything that depends on a particular kind of computer. Yeah, in the NHS, there was already happily coexisting Apples with Windows. Yeah, so the NHS had already got quite some good interoperability worked out, and was able to share files using what was becoming the open document format at the time. So we wanted to really focus on, can we get that 80% right? Can we get a system that would do NHS Mail? Could we get a system that would work with NHS Mail and the NHS Smart Card, so you could interact with the NHS Spine and do the Connecting for Health stuff, choose and book, those sorts of things? So really, could we do stuff that was in a web browser? And I think with that as our goal, we then started to do some good, some engineering. So shall we talk a bit about the engineering first that we did, or shall we talk about?
Let's just talk for a bit about like some of the resistance that we got, like the first things that people said when we started out. We put this thing out, and it was the product of like a couple of weeks' work, really. Yeah. But it actually was a downloadable ISO that you could put onto a USB stick and immediately try out this NHSbuntu new distribution. And a bunch of people actually picked it up that without our knowledge, just YouTubers who test out every distribution were like, well, I've seen this new NHSbuntu, I'm going to install it and try it out. And so there was kind of like road testing NHSbuntu within a few weeks. But the kind of people from within the NHS who didn't get this whatsoever were very negative about the potential to get rid of Microsoft. And our answer to that was, we're not trying to get rid of Microsoft. What we're trying to do is make some kind of alternative option. So at the moment, apart from a few decimal places, the NHS is 100% Microsoft, and it was in 2017. Yeah. And so we were saying, look, if you've got a complete monoculture like that, you're wide open to cyber attacks. And indeed, in 2017, there was a cyber attack. It happened about 6 months after we started doing NHSbuntu. And it was like, guys, we did not have anything to do with this, but it kind of proves our point that you are wide open, because every operating system is vulnerable to certain attacks. And the WannaCry cyber attack was a Windows-only cyber attack. So if you'd have had herd immunity by having a bunch of Linux computers among the Windows ones, that would have reduced the speed of spread, just as it works, just as vaccination works in like human populations. That herd immunity reduces the speed of the spread, reduces the numbers of illnesses. And but it's amazing how people would set up straw man arguments, say, oh, you'll never get 100% to go over to Linux. And we're like, we don't need to. You'll never be able to train staff to use Linux. And I'm like, how much do you know about Linux? Because it's not a command line tool. It's not a terminal now. It is just as good, if not now, arguably better than Windows. But they didn't want to listen to that.
I love that. I love that particular straw man argument about training NHS stuff, right? Because the people who make it, I can only assume that they hold NHS staff in contempt, right? That they've got they completely belittle their skills. They think that they can't learn any new things once they've been taught, and also that, that they're not going to be receptive to new ways of working or adopting new technologies. So, I mean, for me, when I heard senior NHS people around that time using that sort of vocabulary, I was just, it disappoints me more than anything that these people have got to that level of seniority with such obvious contempt for NHS staff. But maybe I should just take it seriously for a moment and then say, actually, what they're saying is you always need to train staff when there is a technology change. Well, much like there was a technology change from Windows XP to Windows 7, or when they roll out new EPR, or when we roll out a new working practice for e-prescribing. We always train staff. We always invest in people. We always want to show them how to do it. So your straw man is either contemptuous of NHS staff, or it just says that you as an individual don't want to learn anything. You don't want to bring on any new stuff, and so those were always disappointing arguments to me. That one, the cultural change is too great. Yeah,
I got massively the feeling that some of the people who felt most threatened by this were people who have been in boring NHS IT since well before computers were interesting. Back in the 80s and 90s, and they were, they just wanted everything to stay the same until after they'd retired. So they were kind of like, look, I've spent my whole life buying stuff from Microsoft, doing a point-and-click installer and calling myself an IT manager. And I don't want to have to learn how to do something new like Linux. Yeah. And our retort to that was, of course, firstly, it would be a shame if we went back to like a sort of manual management of the landscape of Linux machines in the NHS. We would take this opportunity to make all of it much more automated so that updates were not interrupting your clinic time, for example, or rebooting the machine in the middle of a Teams call. We would make all those things happen in the middle of the night or whenever, make it so that it's more convenient, more organized, more secure, and has less manual intervention. But they don't want that because that's what a lot of their job hinges on it. So we got, I mean, I wouldn't say we got all resistance because we actually got a lot of encouragement from the Aperta Foundation, as was. They at least saw the benefit and threw us some cash to sort of keep the project going.
It did, they did get that. Do you remember that we went to see the Southwest CIO and CCIO forum in April of that year? Yeah,
they were all over it. They were like, "This is a great idea."
Yeah,
we presented to Red Hat. Actually, Red Hat were very interested. Canonical liked the idea because, I mean, basically, we were essentially giving them a business model for how to get involved in the NHS IT landscape, which they didn't have a way in before. So they were kind of all over this. We'll come into who wasn't into this later on in the show, but I just want to show a quick slide that I presented at the Digital Health Summer School 2017, and it was like a 6 in 60 lightning talk session. So I had like a really quick series of slides to get through, but this is just one slide from it, which epitomized the situation as it was in 2017. And I think when I read this out, you will see that it's not a million miles away from the situation we find ourselves in 2025. So like, here we are with, there is no plan. Okay. So Windows 7 at the time was widely used in the NHS, and its end of support was January 14th, 2020. But there's this like triple whammy problem in the NHS. They've got lots of old hardware. A lot of that hardware was bought in the Blair era, kind of when they injected a lot of cash and into buildings and things. So old hardware that wouldn't work with Windows 10, clinical apps that needed a browser that wouldn't work with Windows 10 or Edge. And you've got now a time limit to migrate to Windows 10 in what was 3 years. You've got to replace all these clinical legacy apps in order to do number one. And then you've got to upgrade the hardware because they're going to all grind to a halt. And basically just no money to do all three things at the same time. And like that message did land, I think. I think people understood, you know, this was a presentation to CIOs, CCIOs across the whole of the NHS.
Yeah.
But they kind of, I think their solution to that was, okay, well, we need Windows 10 to be bought for us across the whole enterprise. And like, I think that's basically how, you know, that's how they proceeded. You know, they went back to NHS England and said, please, can you talk to Microsoft for us? Because the other real sort of fuck up that they made, contractual fuck up, is that they didn't like the size of the cost of the single line item that was buying Windows for the entire NHS. So they just split it up and made each trust individually negotiate with Microsoft. And like, there are no people on the whole planet that fully understand Microsoft licensing, right? Not even within Microsoft, I don't reckon. It's so complex. So you're putting a trust, little small organization, and its CIO directly in the hands of this behemoth Microsoft and saying, yeah, sure, negotiate a good deal for your little tiny mini industry, instead of using the buying power of the NHS to do it en masse, you know. I'm not saying I like the enterprise-wide agreement, but at least it made financial sense. But I mean, doing individual negotiations was like a criminal act of stupidity. But somebody made that decision. I'm sure maybe somebody out there knows who that was. And they can tell us and we can have them fired. Because there's a lot of people going to get fired when we're in charge, isn't there, Rob?
Well, who knows? Yeah, I mean, it's when you think about it at the sort of at the national scale, you know, the sums of numbers that we're talking about, you know, hundreds of millions of pounds allocated to buying software, just an operating system and Microsoft Office. Hundreds of millions of pounds allocated over 5 years, you know, for buying this stuff. You know, the mind boggles. But I mean, let's think. We sat down and worked it out just for the South by Southwest group, and we were trying to work it out. So I think we worked it out as being about their getting to Windows 10 problem was going to be about 18 million quid. That's 700 quid to license a new machine, over 1,300 machines per organisation. And we'd gone to see 20, and there were 20 organisations present there that day in part of their collective buying group over 5 years. 18.2 million quid. And then, we also said that, to them that because of the end of the enterprise-wide agreement that NHS England / Department of Health had negotiated, they were going to have to become licensing experts themselves, and that, you know, that's always going to be a challenge for them, right?
So what problem NHSbuntu would have solved for them is that initially you can't just rip and replace Microsoft and put Linux in place, because there is staff training issues and it does take a little bit of time to adapt to a new desktop. Although curiously, Windows 11 is coming out now and no one is talking about the impossibility of training staff to use a start menu that's in the middle or any of the other changes and the adware and all the bullshit that's been put into Windows 10 and 11. That kind of staff adaptation is just expected, but they can't get used to Linux possibly. But for the South by Southwest CIOs, for like the wider NHS, a small proportion of machines are absolutely ripe for not using Windows on. Like some of those would be kiosk machines, like a machine that basically just cycles through some slideshow material in the waiting room of a GP surgery, doesn't need a fucking Windows license. You know, it could be anything. And so that would have been low-hanging fruit, where you just put the reason that they probably would hesitate to use, say, a Raspberry Pi or plain Ubuntu or something is because of unfamiliarity. We give them an operating system that we guarantee through open source and through contributions from the community. We take out all the bits of Ubuntu that you don't need in an NHS situation, and we add in the things that you do need. And make sure that it kind of works out of the box. So you would then be fairly confident to just say, right, my kiosk that does nothing but arrivals, when people sign in on an EMIS machine or a System 1 machine in a GP surgery, or it's just doing a slideshow in an ED waiting room, those kind of machines, that maybe represents only like 1% of machines. But okay, great. You've just saved 1%. Is that not worth it? Then as confidence grows, you start saying, well, what are the other machines that are low-hanging fruit? Some that we found that were definitely super interested was bioinformaticians and other people doing data analytics, because most of the analytics and programming tools are really badly supported on Windows. It was even worse in 2017. But on Linux, they would have been able to install Python dead easily and start using R and other analytics tools. And we can make sure that those are all part of the standard NHSbuntu install. So it's all there ready for you when you're a bioinformatician or a lab technician or something like that, using these people are fairly technical users. So they, again, low-hanging fruit, because they kind of want to pull it. They actually want it, So we had those kind of things, people coming to us. We talked to bioinformaticians and we got quite a lot of interest. We even solved some of the problems that people said, oh, well, you won't be able to solve this problem. And almost all of those were coming from a place of severe naivety and ignorance. Like a lot of people who would throw I bet you can't solve this problem. Just people who didn't know enough tech to actually say that's a relatively straightforward problem to solve. I
think that was one of the most surprising things, really, that people who have got to not necessarily positions of senior leadership, because I'll let those people off for being idiots, but certainly senior techies would say, but how are you going to make it work with NHS Mail? Well, it runs on open standards. It's using open source, open standards on open protocols on an open internet. The entirety of that setup is already using open source. What do you mean we're not going to be able to interact with it? Of course we can. So we were able to do it.
That was one of the easiest problems to solve, right?
Yeah, that was one of the easiest problems to solve. We should put the video of using NHS Mail, because that was one of the first things that we solved, right? Using NHS Mail.
I'll splice that video in.
Oh yeah, we'll splice that video in because it's great, right? So from the video, you can see that we've just fired up Linux. We fired up our NHSbuntu. We've opened Thunderbird as a mail client, and it's working with NHS Mail. So that was no problem. NHS
Identity Agent.
The NHS Identity Agent. So I think
it's
really worth spending some time talking about that. So let's talk about what that is. One of the great things that came out of Connecting for Health was both the Spine, which is a set of messaging and patient information applications that all NHS organisations can plug into. One of the great things that they did is it issued every NHS employee with a personal smart card, which was used to identify them as an individual to the spine. Now, so this was designed to improve security and efficiency by allowing the smart card. Whoa, there we go. You've got one to hand. By allowing this smart card to be
that is my smart card.
Yeah, so the smart card acts as a cryptographic token to sign securely any interactions with the spine from your first authentication, when you're putting in your PIN to authenticate to a national application. But it also allows you to sign any messages that you put into a clinical record, so they know that they absolutely were put in by Marcus and not anybody else. So these, so the NHS has a huge investment in these smart cards, right? Every employee has one. Every locum has half a dozen. Every A&E has a generic one saying A&E doctor, do not remove, right? So the investment in these smart cards is immense. There was no way that this was going to get thrown out, right? Because it's taken ages to roll this out. It's a major success. We were told that getting the smart cards to work on Linux wouldn't be possible. Well, that's like red rag to me, having already been told that we couldn't do this. I thought, well, of course we can do that, because there's nothing in these smart cards that's black magic, secret source, and proprietary only to the NHS. Everything in those smart cards is based on open standards, uses open source libraries to make them work, and is the same set of open source components that's used in well, just loads of other smart card applications. From your bank card,
smart card, everything. Like everything that uses smart cards uses the same libraries, basically, and it was all there for us to just, you know, open source applications already existed.
Look,
and like we went to the hack.
It wasn't easy. Let's just be clear. It wasn't easy, and there were so although friendly CIOs in various NHS organisations had sent us some hardware. One trust sent us a couple of Chromebooks with NFC built in for smart cards. Another trust sent us some readers and some blank smart cards, test smart cards for use with test clinical information systems to allow us to do the development on it. And so I set about doing a good amount of research to see how we could make this work, supported by a couple of friends at NHS Digital up in Leeds, as was, and we'll get onto them in a bit more detail afterwards. Because, but yeah, it took me a while of exploration and research, but after a while, I was able, you know, after about a month or so, I was able to put a smart card into the reader, read the NHS certificate from the card. Use that plus my certificate that I put on the same card to sign a message, and so I had a proof of concept of the interactions on a local machine. Now we wanted to get the local machine interacting with the spine, and in order to do that, we were we needed access to the NHS N3 network and some support from the custodians, the operators of the Spine NHS Digital. So NHS Digital were having a hack day. BJSS were there, Kanos were there, bunch of clinicians from the Leeds area were there, and a load of NHS Digital people. And we worked with them, and in 2 days, about 2 days, we're able to get a working set of interactions where the identity agent, the piece of software that sits on the Microsoft computers, was then working on a Linux computer, because it was Java, and the whole point of Java was it was interoperable everywhere, right? So we had the Java identity agent working on Ubuntu, on NHSbuntu. We had a smart card that, on putting in, it would prompt us for our PIN to unlock the smart card. Then it would ask us for our identity, which organization we were claiming to work for. And then it would interact with the spine, get a set of authentication tokens, and then we could launch a clinical application in the browser, such as Choose and Book, and it would work.
We did this.
I think we should show the video at this point, because it's really good to watch, right?
At that hack week, we did the proof of concept was the summary care record application. So summary care record is like a spine-based application that has a little bit of information about each NHS patient that hasn't opted out of having a summary care record. And you have to use a smart card to authenticate to that so that you can see basic information that's on the summary care record. It should have things like your allergies and maybe, you know, key problems, medications, and things like that. It's used a lot in A&E and things when we have an unidentified patient, for example. And we got it so that the summary care record application could be signed into on just a normal NHSbuntu Linux machine using our special identity agent. And that was, I mean, we did have a huge amount of help from the Digital Delivery Centre in Leeds, the NHS Digital as was, because they were really into this project. They thought it improved standards, it made it better, that there was more, that there were different identity agents, for example. So we had our Linux-based one, and they helped us with, in fact, connecting it to the summary care record application required them to make some changes to the summary care record itself, because that was non-standard. So the way, like the Microsoft way that it had been built, meant that it was completely dependent on things like very Microsofty things, like a named pipe and a dynamic linked library, a DLL. None of those things would work on any other platform. So we had to actually hack the summary care record so that it used a standard, a more interoperable approach. So we used a standard like TLS port kind of thing. So it was that's what you interacted with the identity agent through. But yeah, that's how far we got this project. So we've solved identity agent and smart cards. We've solved NHS mail. There are already things like open source DICOM viewers for X-rays and things like that we were bundling into NHSbuntu. And then we were starting to get into the fun bit. So if you have got a suite of all the best applications that that NHS staff would need, what else could you give them that would like be a productivity hack? And we started looking at launchers, so keyboard-driven launchers where you could quickly jump to the application you wanted. Less mouse, using the mouse a lot less, and you're using the keyboard to sort of say, open EMIS or open my Word or word processor or whatever. That sort of stuff. That I think I've got a demo of that somewhere. The Zazu launcher is what we were looking at.
Oh yeah, the launcher was really cool. Yeah, because it was just you were just able to type and it would, and it launched. It was a really nice feature. It sort of started to bring some of the nice whizzy things that you saw in, say, OS X, the latest versions of, on the Apple machines, bringing really nice looking, nice to use productivity tools for and it's not true. Install base.
We were doing like we were bringing power user features for that subset of users that wanted them, right? And it's just not true that NHS staff are not power users. Not all of them are, and there are definitely people who just want to use a very pedestrian, straightforward desktop. And arguably, they would be better served by Linux because we could keep it the same and never change it, so that they don't have to get used to something new. But for the power users, which includes like loads of GPs and consultants and nurses and people who are using that desktop, who've got a very optimized workflow, they're trying to get through as many patients and as higher quality as possible. We could give those power users much better tools to quickly change from organization to organization, from application to application, to pipe data from one application to another, all that kind of stuff. That's just reminded me about another problem we solved. Legacy apps that Windows only. So like in the NHS, we have lots and lots of crappy bespoke legacy apps, which at the time would only work on Windows XP or Windows 7. And the big problem in 2017 was that they wouldn't work if you upgraded to Windows 10. And we have the same problem now in that some things just won't work if you upgrade to Windows 11. So what we solved that problem in at least two ways. There might have been more. One is virtualization. So you can virtualize a non-internet connected version of a legacy operating system and have your legacy app completely cut off from the rest of the world. Apart from, you can use it on the desktop. You can get the benefit of the application, but it's not going to get hacked because it has no internet connection. It's literally just kind of firewalled. Yeah, you can do that with traditional virtualization, like full stack virtualization, or you can do that in another way using containers. And we were using containerization back in 2017, so that we could have multiple applications that weren't designed for Linux, we could get them to run in a custom environment. We managed to get System 1, TPP's System 1 GP system. We had that running in Linux because that's written in Java. There's actually no reason it can't. We could have just compiled it for the Java, just got it running natively in Linux. But actually, I think we decided that because it uses some god-awful, like, 10-year-old version of Linux, Java.
So not quite. So I think so. There were two clinical information systems that we were playing with at the time. Do you remember? Right. So there was TPP's System 1. Okay, so that was probably the second largest install base in GPs for primary care. So if we could get that working on this Linux desktop, then we started to be able to say, here is a compelling offer for GPs. So for that one, with TPP, and we've got a video of it, we should show the video. For that one, what we did there is we virtualized, as we put that in a Windows XP or in a Windows 7 container, and hid that as a seamless application on the NHSbuntu. So, I mean, some people said at the time, so I still need to have a Windows license in order to use this legacy app. To which I said, well, yeah, because you've already got this Windows license. There isn't any new cost here. You already had your Windows XP license. It's just that you can't run it you don't want to run Windows XP anymore on your network for security reasons. And you're trying to upgrade to Windows 10, and this app only works on Windows XP. So we had TPP System 1 running as a containerized, as a virtualized application. And then we also had, was it IMS Maxims? IMS Maxims, which is a hospital clinical information system.
I had completely forgotten about Open Maxims.
Yeah, that's another thing. Another thing that we made happen because nobody asked us to. And around the same time as I was working, so I think around 2016, 2017, IMS Maxims released their clinical information system as open source. Well, that is to say, what they did is they dumped a whole bunch of code on the internet on GitHub and said it's now open source. So there was no documentation. The build framework didn't work. It sat on legacy versions of Java and other libraries, which made me really doubt any security testing or other testing was going on for that particular application. But we did get a good chance taking that code and having a go at getting it running on NHSbuntu. We weren't able to in the end because of the state of it, but in principle,
it was an absolute dog's breakfast, wasn't it?
It was a dog's breakfast. But in theory, right, it was Java. The whole point of the Java setup, it was that you wrote it once and it would run anywhere. So you could have had your Java application running on OS X, on an Apple computer, on a Windows machine, or in a kiosk, or on an Android operating system, or an Android tablet. And if IMS Maxims, I think, had done a better job at making it work across platform, then we, in terms of making it work on OS X, or just making it work, if they had made it work, it would have run on NHSbuntu, and it would have had support for the identity agent as well. Giving us a clinical information system for primary care and a clinical information system for secondary and acute settings, plus the smart card, right? And so that's a whole bunch of things that people said we couldn't do because it was impossible, that we then did because it was possible.
And this was all back in 2017 as well. Now, if we'd have received any support for this centrally and not what actually happened, then we would have, by now, there would have been an 8-year mature project going with a core team behind it, lots of quality assurance and service level assurance that would make the product suitable for use in an NHS environment. You do need guarantees, and it can't just be done by 2 hobbyists. But by now we'd have that, right? We'd have the support, we'd have the foundation behind it that would maintain the open source code, and providers could have provided services around it. So the nice thing about open source is that you don't have just a single provider of services around it, whereas with Microsoft, you can only get your services really from Microsoft. But around an open source project, you've got your choice of who do you want to get your NHSbuntu services from. So that would have given the NHS a whole load of more options. It would have encouraged small, medium enterprises to get involved in all of this work. There was everything to play for, really. But then, I think if we...
So whereabouts are we now, first, Mark? Because how far have we got? I think we've got maybe through to April, right? So we're still maybe, so that recap was good, but let's just say that happened in 4 months.
Yeah,
it really, we've got quite a long way in a very short period of time. We've got a working distribution, branded, working with NHS Mail. We've got proof of concepts of the identity agent, and a working clinical information system. And then so what happened in May? Come on, what happened in May 2017 that was quite significant for the NHS? Well, for the world, really.
Oh yeah. So WannaCry, big cyber attack, essentially like flattened the NHS, and so 2 important projects, were affected by that. Firstly, it was apparent that a lot of people in the NHS did not find out that there was a cyber attack on the morning that it happened. And there was like an 8-hour gap between the first people finding out about it, closing port 446 or whatever it was, that, that later on, there were still hospitals being attacked that didn't know that there was a cyber attack. So we created the bat signal as a result of that. That was a digital health networks kind of grassroots community. Let's just fucking do it. I used to run the bat signal. I did it for about 8 years. That's another episode for sure. But yeah, of course, NHSbuntu, because it's not a Windows, it would have been resistant to WannaCry, because WannaCry was essentially a worm that traveled through the Samba port, the SMB, server message block, I think it's called, isn't it? It's like a Windows only file sharing protocol. Now, Linux has the ability to connect to that protocol, but it's turned off by default. So enough NHSbuntu machines would have probably been resistant to that cyber attack. And at the very least, they could have been used for disaster recovery. You've still got a major problem if half your machines are down because they're Windows, but you've got half of them, So yeah, that was a big demonstrator of the power of having just more than one operating system in play. It doesn't have to be NHSbuntu, it doesn't have to be Linux, but having all Windows is a major problem. And if anything, we're much more vulnerable like that now because no progress has been made.
Yeah, so I think that hack, that cyber incident that happened in May was it did make people listen to us a lot more, right? We were interviewed by Digital Health Intelligence talking about precisely those points you just made about having herd immunity from cyber attacks, or rather, in this case, having zero herd immunity because your whole herd was running the same operating system. We were interviewed by the Register. I was really pleased about that one as well. We'll post these links in the chat later for people to look at read those articles because they're great articles. The comments, rush to the comments, folks, because you've got all so many different people there really bringing out sort of some of the arguments that we've gone over as to why this is a stupid idea. It was fantastic that it being written about in both of those esteemed organs. We got some funding as a result of that. I mean, we weren't the ambulance chasers, rather than we were being chased, right? We were demonstrating that there's a project here that would really help up NHS digital cyber resilience. And then, yeah, we were given some money by the Aperta Foundation to continue our research and do some work packages for them. So that made for quite a fun summer, really, with some I was actually having some funding in order to do the work that we were doing that we'd previously done for free from our just for fun. So that was so then in May there was the cyber attack. In June we were up with the NHS Digital people for their Hack Week. That's where we worked on the identity agent. What else happened about that sort of time? Oh yeah, okay. So we were visited by the NHS. Well, we were visited by the Department of Health brand police. That summer. That was
that was kind of after the high point of like, this is a project with legs and we might be getting somewhere. It was really astonishing that the NHS themselves shut the project down. And I learned later on through connections to Matt Hancock back when he was the health secretary, 2019, 2020 sort of thing, that that when he heard about that, he was actually very embarrassed about it, that's what happened. But that doesn't actually help to fix it. And he didn't lift a finger to repair the situation. But yeah, we were closed down by the NHS itself. So we had a functioning version of an operating system that we were offering essentially for free for the NHS. And we envisaged that there would probably be a foundation around it, that it would be funded enough that we would have, like, we'd be able to pay our mortgages, basically. We didn't want to get rich out of this. We wanted to make a thing that should exist. And we did that. And then the next
it could have been owned and developed out of NHS Digital. I mean, it was at the time there was a lot of talk by the Aperta Foundation, who had some funds to support open source in the NHS, who thought it was going to be necessary to set up lots of these quite convoluted structures for governance and oversight and money and all of these, but really none of that was necessary. It could have just been a project that was run by NHS Digital in the same way that they run the Spine, with support from delivery partners, external consultancy, specialist work, as they've always done, and indeed as the Spine was built. But NHS Digital could have owned and run this, right? We didn't. It would have been nice to have a job out of it myself, but also I wasn't particularly bothered by it either way. I'd already done the hard work. It would be nice to somebody else to come along and pick it up and run with it. But yeah, right. If it was owned by the NHS, if it was their own thing, then there'd be, what might that have cost them to run it, right? I would like to have seen just maybe 1% of the annual Microsoft spend allocated to this project. I think that's what we were talking about at the time.
That's what we were looking for.
1%. So 4.5 million.
Yeah, it wouldn't have even cost that much. I mean,
would it? And actually, would have been enough. We would have burnt 4.5 million quid in about 4.5 years, right? Because it didn't. It doesn't. Well, anyway, right? Because of us using open source, we'd had all we were doing was configuring and customizing, testing, doing the QA, and then releasing the product. We weren't writing the whole operating system from scratch. So we could have continued to build on additional functionality, make specific versions, e.g. for kiosks, for home workers, right, with a built-in VPN, with full disk encryption built in. We had loads of different further development opportunities for it. But really, just like that, getting that 80% of NHS work activities on a done on a computer moved over to NHSbuntu. If we'd have saved 80% of the 450 million pound Microsoft budget, right? That's just, that's heading on towards like new hospital building sort of money there. That's half a billion.
You can very nearly buy a federated data platform for that kind of money.
What, you could buy well, indeed. Well, actually, let's be fair, Marcus. Some of that money is on training. Yeah. So some of that money that they're spending on Paladin is actually spent on training NHS staff to use the new federated data platform. But
amazing.
Yeah, it turns out you can train people.
So I want to get on. There's a little bit I want to do at the end, which is like, what's the future look like? But let's just finish off the thought on how it shut down. So to cut a long story short, NHS brand police took exception to the fact that we were using the NHS 3-letter acronym quite prominently, and I'll put some links to the logo, but the logo essentially was, looked quite a lot like the NHS logo. It was kind of blue, it was italicized, and it may have even used Frutiger. But
it might have done. I mean, I think it looked quite similar to the Facebook logo, which was also white text on a blue background and sans serif.
In the end, we decided not to argue the toss. We changed the name to NHOS, which was definitely trolling them because it basically looked the same, but it was a National Health Operating System. Yeah. And then they sent us another letter, and we said, "Oh fuck it, let's just can the whole thing." So we just we flipped the table over and just walked away. But the idea is still a sound idea, and if we were to do it again, I actually think that using the NHS is the thing that held us back all the way, because there is still a need for a secure, dependable, enterprise-grade operating system for healthcare environments. And that goes much wider than the NHS. So actually, if we were doing this again, wouldn't call it anything to do with the NHS, not just for the brand police reasoning, but just it limits it because it says, well, it's only for the UK and it's only for the NHS. What about private healthcare? What about other countries? And they all have the same need. And actually thinking globally, you would be able to say, right, we just need to create a healthcare optimized operating system with better security, but still usable by a normal non-technical end user, has your packages easily obtainable, and like a constrained app store. So you can tell your staff that anything in that app store is fine to download and install on their computer because it's all been pre-vetted as appropriate, safe, licensed for use in government or in whatever environment. That's the potential for all this, is that there is still a good idea underneath all this. We just didn't have the energy to fight against an uphill battle. And we, as it happened, we did actually try to to save ourselves in a way, to save the project. And we decided the best way of doing that would be to become an actual official project of the NHS. And we approached NHS Digital and said, if this project becomes an official NHS project, then you're absolutely fine to call it NHSbuntu, right? And they said, yeah, but we're not going to do that. And they just let it die. And I know who the people are who let that die. And I'm not going to say their names, but they know who they are. There are people in the NHS who still, for some inexplicable reason, have a job, who could have saved this project. And by now we'd have an 8-year mature operating system ready for the NHS, optimized for the NHS, and probably widely in use as well. And they chose not to do that. They just let the hammer fall because some of them prefer it, just spend a shitload of money with Microsoft. And hey, you never know, you might end up working for them.
Yeah, there was a major lost opportunity, right? It was a real lost opportunity.
It really wasn't that smart, was it?
The 8 years, 8 years have passed, and we're actually in the same set of circumstances again. Okay, Windows 10 is going end of life. Windows 11 is the upgrade path. we've got to test all the clinical applications and make them work on Windows 11. We've got to upgrade all of our hardware so it supports Windows 11, right? It's happening again. And at least if this was happening, sure, computers get faster. We want to use newer machines. We want to do new things with our computers. Sure. But at least if we were the masters of our own destiny with NHS Digital, we could control when that happens. We wouldn't be at the whim of the hardware and upgrade cycle and the software cycle of the Microsoft shareholders, right? Because we'd say when there was a new release that was ready, and make that available to organizations. We would also be able to do other bits of technology priorities, such as making sure things were done web first, or built with the patient, with the user needs center. So whoever that user is, the clinician, the patient, actually having those needs put first, and not the need to sell ads in the middle of a desktop operating system like Microsoft are building now, right? We could have had a totally fit for purpose, live and in use, but
it would have also served as a good kind of distribution mechanism for other good ideas that came along. So, for example, if you're a GP and you've written a piece of software that does one very crucial thing very well, how do you get that on every desktop across the NHS? Well, the short answer is right now you can't. It would take you forever. You'll end up setting up a business and making tiny bits of money and not really getting anywhere. Or you make that part of the NHSbuntu standard offering, and basically it just gets installed by default on every new NHSbuntu machine. So now everybody has that tool, whether that's something like QRisk 3, which we're still waiting for, and no one has done a QRisk 3 calculator that's embedded into the clinical systems yet. Well, we could have had all those things as part of NHSbuntu and just made them available. Every clinical calculator that we ever needed could have been a desktop app that is included with NHSbuntu, and so many other great tools that would have made it easier, faster, safer to deliver healthcare. That's where we'd be by now. We'd be well into a project that was absolutely solid, and we wouldn't be repeating the same stuff, like as you've explained. NHS. The NHS is looking to upgrade to Windows 11, and I'm hearing some of those conversations, online and stuff like that. The conversations that are happening behind the scenes as well are that the exact same problem. Legacy apps are holding them back, hardware is holding them back, and then staff don't like Windows 11. So all three of those things are having to sort of be addressed all at the same time. And now the situation's almost worse than it was in 2017. We've got the integrated care boards are in complete disarray because they've all been told that their jobs are under threat because the ICBs are going to be cut by 50%. So which 50% we don't know yet. So everybody is potentially thinking it could be me that's going to lose my job. So they are working at like 10% of their normal efficiency. And their normal efficiency isn't actually that great because they're a governmental body. But they are almost doing nothing. NHS England have been told that they're going to not exist at all within the next couple of years. So you can imagine exactly how much work is going on there. Their staff are all on NHS jobs looking for another job, or trying to feather their nest to try and make sure they're not one of the ones that gets made redundant and they get 2P'd across into Department of Health and Social Care. But against that background of no one has a clue whether they've got a job by Christmas, they've also got to do this Windows 11 upgrade, and it's got to happen instantly, and everything's got to go perfectly. It's just insanity. In an NHSbuntu world, as you said, those updates can be done when it suits the service. They can also be, we wouldn't expect every single bloody NHS organization to do its own due diligence on its own apps. You'd do it once nationally, verify it works on all the versions of NHSbuntu from here to here, and then you'd say that's been accredited. So now you don't need to worry about that. You don't need to re-accredit it locally. It's been done. It works. There you go. The other thing is that incremental updates can be done as well. We wouldn't necessarily have to have a 5-year cycle where it's Windows 10, Windows 11, Windows 12, Windows 13.
Yeah.
We would kind of try and keep everything as similar as possible, but upgrade the package base. No one even needs to know that happened. It just means that some packages got upgraded and updated. Maybe NHSbuntu 2025 would be a rolling release. What do you think of that? It would be
why not? Right? Why not? Why not? I mean, there's there'd be so many things I'd really like to do if I was doing it again. I'd really like to make one that was perhaps based on Android as well, or doing something that was really good for like mobile, mobile stuff. Oh, I don't know. I mean, look, Marcus, right? I'm not going to say no. I am up for doing this again. Linux. Every year is the year of the Linux desktop, and and who knows, right? 2026 could be the year of the public sector desktop, right? Because maybe you just need to make the goal large enough in order for people to live.
The big difference, what's really changed the Linux landscape, is Steam gaming. So gaming used to be a PC Windows thing. If you were a serious gamer, you would buy some monster truck of a PC and you'd like set it up with Windows and a graphic processing unit and stuff. And then gradually, like most games didn't work on Linux. That's how it was, say, 5-10 years ago. Now, the vast majority of PC games work on Linux, and Steam themselves have put out something called the Steam Deck, which is like a Nintendo Switch. It's a handheld gaming console, but it runs on Linux. So it's Linux. That means because they actually sell a product that's Linux based, they have got skin in the game, making sure that developers do not put out games that don't work on Linux. And the vast back catalogue of Steam games is now all Linux friendly. That's driven a whole load of people to Linux because it's cheap and it's brilliant and it's much more customizable. And so there is a fantastic operating system option now called Bazite, which is Fedora-based Linux distribution, and it's optimized for gaming. So out of the box, even on a big TV screen, you get like a game controller friendly user interface, and you can like select your Steam games, you can sign into Steam, you can use lots of other types of game platforms as well, and you get all of the Linux games and anything that can run in a browser. It's just the ultimate gaming platform, right? That same background of compatibility for everything Windows works with all the other applications as well. So any legacy clinical applications will definitely have better compatibility now. There's a lot more experience in the Linux world with making things compatible. Definitely. If we were to do it again, yes, maybe it'd be a rolling release where instead of upgrading every 3 years or 4 years or 2 years, it would just incrementally upgrade everything all the time. Or we would go with one of these like stateless distributions like Bazite. They're all based on something called Universal Blue, which is a Red Hat Fedora thing. And that means that the entire operating system is based on container images. So you have an immutable image, which is your upgrade. And that means that it's completely secure as well. You cannot fuck with any part of the operating system because it's just one immutable blob. And it doesn't work.
It's great to hear about this, right? Because that's what you and I did in 2017.
Yeah, well, it's one of the solutions
It's what I did. That's the engineering I made. I made an immutable distribution on the we talked about how we were going to split all of those updates over the network and all of that. But it would be a lot easier to do it now, and it would probably it's probably still a 2 bottle of wine problem.
Yeah,
but
if I was to do it again now, I would insist on there being some kind of appropriate support from organizations that wanted it to happen. It wouldn't have to be NHS-based ones. As I said, I think we're limiting it by making it NHS only, but we need a pledge of some cash from several organizations so we're not dependent on any one single organization that can kill us by taking away our funding, as NHS England are doing with the PRSB and did with the FCI. I don't trust anybody anymore to fund things. I would need lots of small funders. That's the way to do it. Maybe crowdsource it, crowdfund it, and say,
if we can crowdsource £500,000, I'm in.
Well, let's see if that's doable. But yeah, I think it's still a good idea. It still needs to be done. I think we'd call it something different and avoid that bear trap. We'd fund it in a different way and avoid that bear trap. We'd build it technically in a different way, which I think would give us a significant amount of other options in terms of security and that sort of thing. So these universal blue builds are a fully continuous integration build where you create a technical bill of materials almost, and you say, start with this version of Linux, add this, then add this, then add this, then remove this, and that's your output. So you actually, it's what's the way, it's like infrastructure as code. You have a series of instructions which designs the outputted distro, which is what we did have, because we were back in 2017 we were using Ubuntu Seeds or something.
We were using Ubuntu Seeds. We were using Jenkins in order to build this stuff automatically. We were building all of our images in the cloud. We were doing all of our testing in the cloud. We were doing the full CI/CD and testing. Yeah, it was a lot. It was a lot of fun doing that. It was a lot of fun.
And I reckon we could get there again. So I mean, maybe we could shout out there and say, if there are any NHS IT people out there who are tired of doing the same thing continuously for 20 years and getting the same results and becoming more and more and more embedded in the Microsoft world, if there's anybody who wants to do something different
and has £500,000
and has £500,000 I think it has to find its own way of being funded, and it would eventually be some kind of foundation so that that there's money to keep it going, because people won't install something that they think they might have to uninstall in 2 years' time because the thing's gone bust. You need to prove that it's going to be around for the long haul, and that's why maybe partnering with Red Hat or Canonical or the Linux Foundation or somebody like that would give you the proof that it's going to be a long-term thing. That's a key feature, I think, as well, about how you design the organizational governance around it. But yeah, I think it's I would love to see it happen. Doesn't even have to be us that do it. It'd be great if it just happened. It'd be even better, in fact, if someone else did it. Quite frankly, it would be great. But I would use it as my daily driver operating system. I promise. If somebody comes up with a good enough NHSbuntu or equivalent, I will test it for you. And I think there'll be lots of people who would test it. Rob, it's been fun. It's been really cool to review the NHSbuntu story. And I think this is quite an interesting episode because it's a bit lively and it's a bit raucous, and it's a great idea we're talking about as well. I will link in the show notes to as much as of the things that we've discussed as I can find. If there are any rare NHSbuntu videos that we can dredge up, I will make sure they're uploaded somewhere that they're visible on the internet. And but yeah, thanks again, Rob, for talking about this with me. And I think we will have to have you back on purely to do the Open Maxims episode and the episode about OpenGP SOC, which is even more.
Let's do those two. Another time. I'd love to be back with you. It'd be great.
Yeah. So thank you so much, Rob, and goodbye, everyone. Bye now.